Hi, I'm Jay Marshall. You may remember me from such videos as Why the Concept of the West is Relevant Today, or Is this thing really on? Here today to talk to you about liberty and freedom. I was thunderstruck to learn a few weeks ago from Dean Roberts' video that they are not the same. As an undergraduate English major, I'm ashamed to admit I've always used them interchangeably. As Hannah Finnicle Pitkin wrote in Our Freedom and Liberty Twins, spoiler, they're not, I'm not alone, with Maurice Cranston and Sir Isaiah Berlin included among those who also use them interchangeably. If I wanted to be fancy, I would actually use liberty. If I wanted to be succinct, which admittedly is a rarity, I would use free. So how are they different? Freedom versus liberty. It sounds like a Thanksgiving football rivalry game. There actually is a Freedom University, but they don't have a football team and they are more an activist group, and they wouldn't really stand a chance against our Division I Liberty Flames regardless. I'm just going to take a minute to share the screen. So freedom versus liberty. We're going to take a look at the ways they're different, which include origin, usage, perception, our knowledge rate regarding their journey through the English language, as well as the scale of population and state that might have applied to them when they were being used. We begin with the origin because, as Aristotle said in Politics, he who thus considers things in their first growth and origin, whether a state or anything else, will obtain the clearest view of them. And in fact, when we're talking about origins, one is German and comes to us from the Anglo-Saxons. That would be freedom. The other is Latin via Old French of the Normans, which of course is liberty. English as a language presents a unique problem, as my undergraduate history of the English language professor taught me. You may actually recognize him because if you watch the National Spelling Bee, he is one of the pronunciation experts. Well, long before that, he taught little old me at Westfield State College because he was a PhD in linguistics from MIT and was at the time the pronunciation editor of Merriam-Webster, which is actually right around the corner from me in my office in Springfield. And it's actually in a really bad neighborhood, so I took the photo very quickly and left yesterday. I actually had some clients who lived in that neighborhood and were shot at way back when I worked in social services. Compounding our problem is that English, as a result of conquests, had words enter use unexpectedly, fall out of use, be reintroduced, or become out of favor in official proceedings, like when the French replaced perfectly fine Anglo-Saxon words with those of their own, particularly with regard to law and government. But as we all know, we are all one stub toe, away to easily reveal examples of how those words continue to live on outside of formality. In the case of liberty, it had actually fallen out of use for some unknown reason and was replaced by free until being reintroduced during the Norman conquest. But that's always tricky because words begin to evolve and change in one culture and language, and when they reemerge, they're not the same as when they faded from use in the old. Given the role of the Normans, it makes sense that the Greco-Roman word would be used for liberal arts or liberality. But with both words, it's a lot like trying to hit a moving target. Liberty derives from the Latin liber, or free, liberare, to free or liberate, and libertas, liberty or freedom. Liberos, a free man, or liberi, children of the free man. One of the interesting things to me about all of this is that there's actually a Roman god, Liber, god of vegetative growth and viniculture. And we can trace Liber from a form of language in the word you'll find there in red that I'm not going to try to pronounce, and from the Indo-European word we see there in green. Latin liber is related to the Greek word you'll find there in blue, and of course we can trace the Roman god Liber to the Greek god Dionysus. The phrase in red translates into I go where I will from the Greek, or to go or come in the blue. The Greek word then represents democracy and comes into use during the First Persian War, when active state participation in the Greek style was threatened by the Persian narrow aristocracy and its distant priest-king methodology, as very effectively noted in that our history, our liberty and freedom twins. This allows a timely opportunity to reference scale. As mentioned by Dr. Don Livingston in his video, Proper Size and Scale of Political Order in the Ancient World, democracy was only viable within a certain size of population. Athens was able to achieve what he referred to as political order, defined as security, economic prosperity, justice, and human excellence. With 300,000 people, of whom 40,000 males were voters, many Greek states achieve similar aims with far smaller numbers. Grow beyond it, and it all becomes too difficult to rule and leads to the risks of despotism, tyranny, or imperialism. We need to remember that when we're considering the intent and use of the word liberty or libertas. It is hard to fathom the Greeks imagining superpower-sized nations and the application of their ideal to hundreds of millions of people. I'll be honest, my local town meeting is bad enough when just 80 people show up. Libertas thus comes out of the notion of negative liberty in terms of protection from abuse of power. Thus, liberty found more of a use in politics and government. Aristotle used the word liberty 4 times in his Politics. The first in Book 4, for of liberty and equality, as is thought by some, are chiefly to be found in democracy. They will best be attained when all persons alike share in the government to the utmost. He then gives a description of the types of democracy with varying levels of inclusion. The other 3 are in Book 6. The basis of a democratic state is liberty, which according to the common opinion of men can only be enjoyed in such a state. This they affirm to be the great end of every democracy. One principle of liberty is for all to rule and be ruled in turn, and indeed democratic justice is the application of numerical, not proportionate equality. Whence it follows that the majority must be supreme, and that whatever the majority approve must be the end and the just. Every citizen, it is said, must have equality, and therefore, in a democracy, the poor have more power than the rich, because there are more of them, and the will of the majority is supreme. This, then, is one note of liberty which all Democrats affirm to be the principle of their state. Another is that a man should live as he likes. This, they say, is the privilege of a free man. And I think as we progress in this class, we're going to find later on how some of those fears of the poor having more power will influence our founding fathers in the states. As Jeff Kennedy noted, the neo-Roman writers sought to expand the definition of independence from the will of others to include the absence of the persistent condition of dependence on the arbitrary will of another. Free, however, conversely, comes from the Germanic Frio family. Unfortunately, we just do not know enough about its origins compared to all that we have found from the Greeks and Romans, which is kind of remarkable when you think that so much of Greece and Rome fell out of our knowledge base, only to return during the Renaissance. Seems much agreement that words that can be found in that free family come out of an Indo-European root from the verb pre, to love. There was a Gothic split, perhaps from a Celtic influence, that leads to one meaning of love and friendship, and for one more specifically to liberty. And I'm just going to share my screen with you again, because I want to just reference Merriam-Webster, again, right down the street, and how they viewed it with their etymology and history, coming from Middle English, from Old English, freo, akin to Old High, German free, Welsh rid, I'm going with rid, Sanskrit priya, own, and dear. The German word, rather, generally referred to corporate entities, guilds, towns, churches, those types of organizations with protected privileges from authority. The members of that body thus share freedoms as a term of membership, of belonging. Free can be used with inordinate objects, nobility, group membership, and even male potency. It can mean without charge, without obstruction, such as space. It can refer to doing something of one's own will, such as doing it freely. Free can be a state of being, something psychic. Conversely, sailors get to go on liberty, not free. It is worth noting that no other European language, ancient or modern, offers such a choice. German only has Freiheit. French only has liberté. Again, referencing the article, liberty and freedom, are they twins? As Hannah noted, English is the only unregulated language. We do not have, like in Castilian Spanish, that Castile body mandating what the appropriate terms are, or in French at the Academy. English is the only unregulated language. Were it not, one has to wonder if perhaps one word would be used a la Newspeak, and how that might change the English speaker's experience. Would English still be the language of the great democratic experiment, or would there even have been one? Hannah Arendt, one of the great experts on totalitarianism, viewed liberty as a negative freedom, or the lack of others oppressing, whereas freedom, in her view, was more in line with positive liberty, the power to advance one's own self with connotations of spontaneity and initiative, and to partake in democratic government, which is, of course, problematic, as democracy comes from the Greeks. If we view Aristotle's politics, we gain a great exploration of the more moral and political versus the metaphysical. And in this document, a strong emphasis on being able to govern one's own self, as well as participate in government. These are his two marks of freedom, again, drawing from the twins article: living as one wishes, having a share in ruling office equal to that of one's fellow citizens, to which Thucydides would add a third via Pericles, of being treated equally by the law in his history of the Peloponnesian War. Now, all of this may begin to smack a bit of the type of class distinctions and elitism one might find in an episode of Downton Abbey, and I'm not ashamed to admit that it just dropped on Netflix this month and I've been binge watching it. Jeff Kennedy noted that Chaim Wyzubski took this a step further, denoting a clash between citizen civil rights and the state, or senatorial authority over those citizens despite those rights. The Senate, or in a larger sense, representative government, provides not freedom to be as one chooses, as much as freedom to select a leader or leaders who will rule. This conflict would play out between the optimates who advance that interpretation and the populares who are more in favor of wider spread and broaderly interpreted democracy. In its most extreme form, Senatus Consultum Ultimum existed as an emergency powers act that allowed preservation of the state at the expense of citizens now perceived as hostile to it. Such authority in contemporary times has proven chilling by example. It's worth noting that in our textbook, Hannon puts great emphasis on the rule of law, the upholding of contracts, even to the extent of people holding their sovereign to account, whether they be local or across the sea, a free people with rights protected in law. As I fear I'm over time, I will close here, but I do want to thank you for attending my TED Talk, and I look forward to viewing yours as well. Thank you and good night.